So welcome to the Friday Transportation Seminar on a rainy Friday in Portland. My name is Chris Monsieur. I'm an associate professor in the Civil and Environmental Engineering, and together with Professor Liu from Urban Studies and Planning, we co-organized this seminar this quarter. We're very pleased today to have Kristen Stallman from the Oregon Department of Transportation to talk about one of our treasures here in the Pacific Northwest, the historic Columbia River Highway. So Kristen has been at ODOT's Region 1. She's the National Scenic Area Coordinator. She's been there since 2006. And prior to that, she worked for the Oregon Parks and Recreation, Clackamas County, and she has degrees from the University of Massachusetts and the University of Oregon in landscape architecture. So I'm going to turn it over to Kristen. Thank you.
Project, the Columbia River Highway, and I hope after the end of this presentation it's your favorite project too. The historic Columbia River Highway, or the Columbia River Highway as it was initially known, is a tale of visionaries, skilled engineers, craftsmen, and it just is a monument to Oregon and to the Columbia River Gorge. It started construction in 1913, so in 2013 we're at like a 100-year mile marker for the highway itself, and it's a really exciting time. I was just telling Chris that so much is going on in the highway, and then I'm really excited to share it with you because I really want you to get as excited about this project as I am, and so that you can see the possibilities. And I feel like a lot of you are in school or going to be out of school soon, so you'll be in a position to help me implement this vision. So what we're trying to do is to make a world-class adventure, a world-class destination. We feel we have a lot of the elements for that. There's some key missing elements that I'm going to go through today. But can you imagine once the trail is reconnected through the gorge, we really hope that that would be a world-class destination for people and really put Oregon on the map. So the Columbia River Highway, when it was initially conceived, went from Portland all the way out to the Dalles and eventually went out to the coast. You know, when you go to Seaside, the turnaround there was the end of the Columbia River Highway, and eventually went all the way out to the Pendleton and out towards the Dalles. But the initial section of trail started in Portland and went out to the Dalles, Oregon. And actually, the mile markers along the highway that you see today, they start on 3rd and Stark in downtown Portland. So when you see those historic concrete mile markers along the highway as you drive the highway by Multnomah Falls, Vista House, those start here in downtown Portland. What I like to think about is when the historic highway was built, it was the only road between here and there. It's one of the first highways in America designed specifically for automobiles. So think back, 1913, cars were relatively new. This was before the Model T. Only the really wealthy people at the time had cars. And I was like, oh, and they were really excited for the idea of having a roadway through the gorge, this beautiful landscape. I think when it was conceived, it was thought more as a tourist destination, a scenic route, rather than a commercial route. I think at the time, I kind of liken it to, I remember when I first started and when I worked at Clackamas County a long time ago, the internet was new and they had one computer set up in the office for internet use. And we're like, oh, what's that for? Or how do we use that? So that was like, oh, we're never going to use that thing. So I think it was the same thing for the cars at the time. We have the information highway. They had cars were just really fun things to take out on the weekends for Sunday drives. They never really thought that cars would become such a important part of our life. And soon after, this highway was opened in 1922, it was quickly outdated because people's cars and trucks and everything started on the road. The narrow curves and roads they were already looking soon after for this straighter route down on the Columbia River, I-84. So today I'm going to talk to you about, I'm going to share with you all the great stuff that is happening on the highway. It's kind of a crazy presentation because you'll see as the Scenic Area Coordinator at ODOT, I deal with lots of little things to big visions. So I'm going to try to rope you into those visions and those ideas. And how can we make the Columbia River Gorge, the highway, a world-class adventure? I'm actually asking you to help me kind of figure out how we can really tap into this resource and what steps we need to take to get it there. So what's been going on? This is a section of the Columbia River Highway. Many of you know it. You've been to the places along the highway. It's iconic. You see the white guardrail. You know the places, Multnomah Falls, Vista House, the waterfalls. But many of the people don't know it's the Columbia River Highway that takes you there. And this is the design landscape. It was set out with beauty and nature in mind. They really designed the road, the curves for the views. I wish a little bit at ODOT did this a little bit more today. We're trying to get them to do that. And it goes all the way out to the Dalles. So if you've been on your bike ride, how many of you have been on the section between Hood River and Mosier, the trail section out there? I see a lot of hands go up. If you haven't been there, go there this weekend. I mean, it's fantastic. It's a restored section of trail. It's about 5 miles long. It goes from Hood River to Mosier, so it's not that far out of town. But it takes you through tunnels, and it's a roadway. It's a multi-use trail today. And our vision is to connect this trail through the gorge using the drivable sections of the highway, sections like this, and new trail segments. To do that, Chris was talking about years ago, he had a student class work on a project to figure out where the trail should go. And I'll step back. There's sections of the highway that are still there today, the drivable sections, but it's a Columbia River Gorge. It's a difficult place to build roads and trails. There's not a lot of room. So in the 50s and 60s, when they were building the interstate, they had to abandon or destroy a lot of the sections of the roadway, specifically the sections between Hood River and Cascade Locks. So what you don't know is as you drive down the highway today, there's sections of the old highway paralleling the roadway. And I think Pam said she had gone out there, and it's really cool. So next time you drive down the gorge, you can kind of look out your window and kind of find the old road. But these are abandoned sections of road that you can kick the moss and see the old highway underneath. But then they're quickly, abruptly discontinued where I-84 went straight. And, you know, the old highway would loop around and really respect the landscape while I-84 just went straight and fast through the gorge. So going back to Chris's project, at one time we looked at where we could do a trail through the gorge in the 80s and 90s. And when I started work at ODOT about 7 years ago, I was like, we're saying, yes, we want to build a trail through the gorge, but where should it go? And basically all it was like aerial photos with a Sharpie line saying this is where the old highway is and this is where we think we should do it. But it was like some crazy ideas. Like one of them was a 3/4 mile floating walkway. There was potentially a tunnel at Mitchell Point. I'm like, really? I have to go out in the public and say, yes, we're going to do this. We're going to raise the money to do this, when it was kind of like, ooh, I don't really know if we can actually build a trail through the gorge. So one of the first projects we worked on was this reconnection project, 2016 reconnection projects, to really figure out where the trail should go and does it really make sense where it should be. And this was we looked at the whole sections of trail. This was actually one of the funnest times I was out there, because we'd actually go hiking around the woods, find the old sections of trail, kind of go off the trail and try to figure out where it should go. And we laid out different sections of where it should go. And from that, we were able to get a really good cost estimate. So we kind of said, yes, we can build the trail, but let's learn a little bit more about those historic sections of trail, the pavement in the woods. And so we did a cultural landscape inventory, which was a fascinating process, too, where we went through and we studied what was there. We did a lot of field inventory work. We used GIS. And we actually went on those old sections of the highway. You can see this is a 1939 photo of the highway before I-84. And the section below is a photo from 2006. And we tried to match those up. And you can kind of see on here different areas, look like right here, potentially right in this area, there might have been a little viewpoint at one time if you look above here. And we tried to look at all the old postcards. Many of you have probably seen all the old postcards, and really put it back together, what was out there in the field. Really fun project. This is where I go into, my job is so much fun. And so I get to do this stuff. And then from that study, where we had the line on the map, on the air photo, we kind of knew where it was. We had some engineering help. We had the geotechs from ODOT go out and look at it. We had the bridge designers to go evaluate what was in that 2016 plan. And then over that time, LIDAR became available, so we were able to get a really good base map, 2-foot contours. And for the highway, since it's a multi-use trail, and some of you are engineers and planners, to have a bicycle trail to meet the ADA requirements, really we want to design a trail no more than 5% slope, which is really hard to do in the gorge. And how do you lay out a trail at that 5% slope? So now we have the 2-foot contours, so we could really test our alignment. And so in 2011, we did a trail plan, and we laid out the trail and kind of got a better sense of how many walls, how many bridges, what types of facilities we would need. And we were able to lay out the trail in great detail to make sure we met the 5% slope. So you can see in the section where we had the trail going straight in the earlier plan, we now realize that we had to do a lot of curves and try to connect it through. And at the same time, there was a little section of trail. We got a little grant, and we were able to construct a half-mile of trail between Starvation Creek and Viento. And it was one of those projects we were all excited. I went out in the field, and there's people who have been building this trail. Of course, it takes a while. And they're like, oh, Kristen, why did you do it this way? Why did you do it that way? And I'm like, oh, I didn't realize there was rules, but there is rules, but they were never written down. So we spent a lot of time at our office, and I work a lot with interns, and people like you, a lot of PSU students have come through my shop, and we put together the Historic Highway State Trail Guidelines, so we would be able to capture all these unwritten down rules to make sure that when we build new trail, it's consistent all the way through. Since it's a 73-mile corridor, some drivable, some trail, we wanted to build on the consistency, but build upon the beauty. When this highway was built, it was such a beautiful highway, built to the highest engineering standards. And the way that Samuel Lancaster, the original engineer, landscape architect for the highway, laid the trail out the way he would bring you up to the beauty spots, as he called it. We really wanted to do that with our new trail connections. And then again, we wanted to build on the 11 miles of trail that's already complete and operating the gorge, and learn from what has already been done. This is the section that I want you all to go this weekend. It's the section between Hood River and Mosier. It's a beautiful section. And this is one of my other favorite projects, like just to kind of my eclectic job at ODOT. But as we were out there, out in the field, walking around, looking at places, we'd run into old people who live next door, and they're like, the old wagon road used to go over here. You should look at that. I'm like, we need to capture these stories, these people remember. And as you remember, I-84 came through the gorge. As you ride through I-84, there was all these exits with names on it, like Starvation Creek, Viento, Wyeth. Like, what are these places? There's nobody there today. But we'd hear stories that people lived here once before. So we did an oral history project. We got a $15,000 grant, and with using some interns, we had it really fun. I think this was the summer of 2009. We got to interview 18 people who lived or worked along the historic highway. And those stories, because before it was very technical, really engineering standpoints, when you started to talk to the people who lived on the highway, who had farms, who had vacation cabins, gas stations, the whole place came alive. And then at this opening, we had a trail opening at Viento. We were able to invite those families out back to the spaces so that they could see that we were continuing their vision. They had kind of sad stories of when the freeway went through. But if you've all been in the gorge, you know it's a beautiful place. So these people have that same affinity of place, but they got to live there before I-84. So you can imagine they had strong feelings, and this was a great project. I didn't realize what impact this project would have, but it really brought a whole new level of interest to the project. And for example, we were out doing a site visit one day, and there's a road that goes by a bunch of people's houses. And you can imagine when you build a trail, you always have those NIMBY issues, not in my backyard issues, of property owners who don't want a trail coming through their yard, or the crime, or you've heard all those stories. But because we did that oral history project, well, they organized this neighborhood meeting, and I went out to this one section. This is east of Mitchell Point, and I was a little nervous. The property owners were kind of like, you know, when you're just nervous, they didn't know what to expect, and they were like, trail, we don't want this. But luckily, when we went out there, Mr. Galligan, who is this man right here, his family had lived along the highway. His great-great-grandfather, Edgar Locke, his house is called the Locke's Highway Place. It was built before the historic highway was even built. It was built since 1889. We had interviewed him, and he's like your grandfather now. He gave us a big hug, and his wife. And so all these other people were like, they're not like government employees. They're like family. And so it became like the more relaxed, and we were able to work with them and build relationships, and that they could trust us, and it was a great project. And then from that project, you know, just kind of building support for this project, I figured a lot of this highway and the trail idea and the National Scenic Area came around in the 1980s and 90s, and it was really top-down. Like, I felt like the communities felt like the government was imposing the scenic area on them, and this trail was just part of that. And we had to work in the last couple of years to really turn that around, that this is something that the communities want. This is good for your community. It's good for the city of Hood River. It's good for the city of Cascade Locks. And projects like this really help make it build ownership and support for the project. And you can see here, I'm out, and Channel 8 News came out for the project. There's great stories. It adds life to it. It's kind of not like this lifeless trail through the gorge. This is a section near Mitchell Point, and we did a couple interviews here. And the first story is this area was called Little Boy Ranch. And on the maps, it was always called Sunny. And we're like, where does the name Sunny comes from? Well, the railroad didn't want to write Little Boy Ranch, so they said, oh, Sunny is a short name for little boy. So that's how they, like, oh, I didn't know that story. But these kids were adopted, and there was like almost like a little orphanage in this great house out here, and there's legends of Teddy Roosevelt coming out to hunt elk and all these great stories. And this was in the 20s. The Depression came in the 30s, and the inn was sold to this guy's grandma, Grandma Babe, and it turned into a truck stop. And so we met this guy who was living in the Dalles now, but he was a bluegrass musician. And he told us a story one night. He was in the VFW in the Dalles, and he said, my grandma used to live out at Mitchell Point. He's like, oh, the old, and he was sitting next to a 98-year-old truck driver, this old guy at the VFW. And Michael said, yeah, my grandmother used to live at Mitchell Point, and we found out he was a truck driver. He's like, oh, I knew that place well, because this was a truck stop. And it was famous for its tuck-ins, and actually there was stories of it having, during Prohibition, there were stills and all that stuff, and we were able to verify that in the Oregonian. But the waitresses, this house here was then, once it was no longer a house, was turned into a restaurant, kind of like a road stop diner. And these little cabins up in the road were famous for its tuck-ins by the waitresses. So, and the story goes, the story was like, oh, I knew Grandma Babe, I knew your grandmother. And the 90-year truck driver was talking to Michael Tenney, and he pulled up his shirt, and he had a tattoo that said, like, Babe, 1945, tattooed on his arm. I'm like, who would ever guess that? And so with that, we made interpretive signs around that whole idea. So, I mean, the stories and they really make the place come to life. And there you can see Grandma Babe up there and all that stuff. But so today, right now, as we talk, there's construction happening in the gorge. We're working on a project that's called John Beyond to Moffett. It's a 1.6 section of trail just west of Cascade Locks. And I like to say when this section is complete, you'll be able to ride your bike from Troutdale all the way to Cascade Locks without going on to I-84. And last year there was a MERP project in Cascade Locks, which was a great project. You may have heard about it. But I think this trail project really has great benefits for the community. This summer, mark it on your schedule, take your bikes out to Cascade Locks, and you'll be able to ride to Multnomah Falls from Cascade Locks without going on to I-84. So it really changes the way we use that community. And this is just the fun part of my job. I'm a planner. Some of you are planners, and I feel like I've been planning now, I think, for 20 years. I feel like you never see the fruits of your labor, but this is a project where we actually did some work. These are early kind of concepts for a bridge that we designed over McCord Creek. And you can see this is the construction of the bridge. And here is the bridge today as it's almost done. And the idea here is to kind of make it feel like a special place on the bridge, but we didn't want to replicate history. In this historic preservation world, you don't want to create a false sense of history. You don't want it to feel like exactly like an old bridge. So this one is more of a 1930s era, but we built upon a lot of it. And actually, I think there's some people, like we did a PSU class, is a capstone project. It's going out there, so we did a tour last couple weeks ago. So that's a fun project they're working out there. So there's some other PSU students. I wanted to share these photos. The trail goes off into the woods, and some of the issues that we had to deal with is in the scenic, it's the National Scenic Area, so we have to do National Scenic Area permitting, which is this whole extra level of permitting and sensitivity. And this is a special management area, so it's even more strict of what we can do. And we have to look at all the plant species and animal species. And one species in particular that you'll find in the gorge is the Larch Mountain Salamander. I know much more about the Larch Mountain Salamanders now because of this project. This is their habitat area. And we tried to design the trail around it. We worked closely with our biologists. However, things happened. Last spring, it was spring break, so about a year ago, construction was happening on the trail. And just so happened, 7 herpetologists were on a hike to this area, and they found Larch Mountain salamanders like underneath the bulldozers. So the had to stop, and we had to like come up with mitigations to figure out what to do with it. So actually, one of the mitigations were what you're supposed to do with the Larch Mountain salamanders is not construct in the spring, because that's when they come up to the surface. They go deep down into the rocky talus slopes in the winter and summer when it's too hot or too cold, but in the spring and the fall is when they're out. So the contractors weren't supposed to be out there. But one of the mitigations were the inspectors had to walk along the trail every morning and throw off the salamanders. So that was an interesting job. And you can see this is the trail kind of under development. This is what it looked like last week. You can see we're putting in the iconic white wooden guardrail that was like reminiscent of the early road construction. We have great views to Beacon Rock in the background. There's some tricky engineering. This is a soil nail wall, and we're doing micro piles. So for your engineering, we have to go underneath a freeway bridge out there. So this is kind of the construction. And when we were plotting this out, I'm like, how are we going to get under this bridge? Because it was steep, and you don't know where. But the engineers assured us it could be done. And so it's really nice to see it under construction, and I can now visualize what we're doing. But you can see it's just a really interesting layer. This is just a photo. This is a 1914 Moffett Creek Bridge. It was part of the original highway. When it was constructed, it was the longest arch bridge in the world, concrete arch bridge in the world. And you have the 50s bridge behind it. And then behind that, you have the I-84 bridge, westbound I-84, which was just built 2 years ago. So you can kind of see the evolution of bridge building in the gorge. And our trail goes over the historic bridge, turns and goes underneath these bridges. So then you're on the south side of the highway. And then last week, I've been really busy with students lately. This is 150 OSU engineering students who we gave a tour to, just to kind of show them all the unique engineering and the challenges we have out there. There's other great things. So if you haven't been on the highway for a while, I encourage you to go back out. This is at Lateral Falls. There's been a big project out there to restore some of the viewpoints and do some really nice upgrades, well-deserved upgrades in these locations. This is Mitchell Point, where that interpretive sign is going to go that I showed you earlier, but this was just an ugly chain link fence last year, and we're doing some great work. I just included this to just show you how eclectic my job is. I did a grant to do a scenic byway grant to replace the white wooden guardrail you have along the highway. And the new guardrail that you see along the drivable portions up above this area here is, if you look at it, it didn't meet current crash safety standards. So in the late 80s, early 90s, they developed a new standard of guardrail, and what they decided they could do is put a steel back the guardrail. So it's a wooden guardrail with a steel backing on the back of it. And that, at the time, met current crash safety standards. And so we had some of this older guardrail out there. And I thought, oh, that's really ugly. We need to replace that, bring that up to the new standard. And I did a grant, was successful, and it turns out that this upper guardrail no longer meets the safety standards, because now, what do we have more now on the roads? We have more SUVs, taller cars, so the safety standards have changed. So now this guardrail doesn't meet safety standards. So we had to come up with yet a new standard of guardrail. And so here you go. I was like, what is it going to look? So the new guardrail we have is basically the same as this lower guardrail with a fake rail on top of it. So it meets the standards, and we were able to convince FHWA and our engineers that this is safe and run all the testing. But then I was wondering, what are the scenic impacts of that taller guardrail? Because you can see it's much taller than what was out there before. Turns out it's much more historically accurate now because the original guardrail was taller and bigger. So the SHPO people, the State Historic Preservation people, really like this new guardrail. And so this is what I did. This is what I do at my office. I make foam core guardrail and go test it in the field. Another one of my favorite projects you won't even notice is like we were out at Portland's Women's Forum, and this is that great viewpoint you get to right before you get to Vista House. But we were out there and we were noticing that people were climbing on top of these rock walls to get the picture, or they're holding their digital camera up like this because of all the vegetation and the gorge grows so quickly. So we worked on a plan, a great plan, to figure out selectively remove the trees, and then we had to do an NSA permit and do public outreach to make sure we were not impacting habitats and all that stuff. So this year when you go out to the gorge, you'll notice that you can see a lot more. Because it is a scenic highway, you really want to see things along the way. We have funding. We got some grants recently, and this is exciting. We're going to start the preliminary engineering on the next section of trail. Now we've closed the gap between Troutdale and Cascade Locks with that project I just showed you. The next section, we have about 10 more miles to go, and we have about engineering to do the money to do the engineering for the next 6 miles of trail. So we've started that, which is really exciting. So hopefully with engineering money, the construction money won't be far behind. So there's other things happening, and we really wanted to look at doing some gateway signs. So we got another grant to do a gateway sign, and this is in the Dalles as you enter on the Columbia River Highway. So it was kind of a fun project to figure out how tall this sign needed to be to make it actually feel like you're entering a gateway. So we looked at a lot of the National Park Service signs and kind of laid this out. This is an 18-foot high stone obelisk. At first I was like, that seems so high, but when you put it into the context of the landscape, it seems to fit. This is a really exciting project. I love working with the communities in my job, and this is a project we call the Mosier Hub. And this was a project where a city councilor called me. We had gotten a grant. We put it in one of those kind of interpretive signs in downtown Mosier. And she's like, oh, Kristen, I'm so disappointed. I thought an interpretive sign. I was thinking kiosk or something more. And I said, oh, well, maybe we could do something. So we started brainstorming. We did a couple site visits. And we came up with this idea to do the Mosier Hub. What happens now is a lot of cyclists will ride through Mosier. They start in Hood River. It's a trail for 5 miles, and then they go on this beautiful section of the old highway that goes up to Rowena Plateau. And there's a bathroom along the way, but they totally want to go to Mosier because that's the place where you can get a beer or a cup of coffee or an ice cream cone. It's the place to stop. But it's a town of 400, and there's no restrooms. There's no facilities for all these cyclists, hundreds of cyclists that come through town. So we thought, wouldn't it be great to design a bicycle wayside, a place where you really want to encourage, like if you're going to go for a bike ride in Mosier, you could say, hey, let's meet up at the Mosier Hub. You can grab your cup of coffee in Mosier and take off from there. So we tried to come up with this concept of a hub, which would have a place for a bathroom. You'd be able to fill your water bottle. There would be maps to figure out where you want to go and how far you want to go. We wanted to include rules of the road. As you know, in Mosier, there's lots of cherry orchards and cherry trucks, so we want bicyclists to be polite and kind of follow the rules of the road. But we just really wanted a way to make the trail a benefit to these local communities so that people come, they go cycling there, but they also spend money in the communities. So we came up with this idea. And now we're trying to find money for it. So this is the idea. This is sort of the hub. And now the communities of Cascade Locks, Hood River, Troutdale, everybody wants a hub. So we're trying to come up with a plan of how do we do this. I love this. You know there's a problem when you're working on a project, and I stop in the Chevron in Troutdale, and they have a map of the Columbia River Highway provided by, down here it says, this is a homemade, oh, here it is, free map courtesy of the Troutdale Chevron. So these are distances along the historic highway from the Chevron. So I think we need a new map if they have to make their own map, and that they have enough requests that they're giving away maps. So that's one of my projects, and I've also heard we need a new bike map because we have all these new trails opening, so I have a lot of work on maps happening. I also realized we're spending millions of dollars. That last trail project we built is $8 million. But sometimes we forget the little things that we can do to improve our trail system and letting the cyclists know where the trail is, our signs are really bad, and it's really hard to find. If you've ever been out there on some of the sections of trail, we really need to do improved wayfinding. So we just finished this study this last week. Actually, it will be done soon, but it's a new look for the trail because it's the historic Columbia River Highway State Trail. It's a mouthful, so we're trying to come up with an icon or a logo, and we're using the Route 30 shield here to kind of really use. We're trying to, when we started this contract, one of the guys in our office is like, we need to have an icon that somebody would want to get a tattoo on their calf. Then we'll know we're successful. So I challenge you to get a tattoo. And hopefully that then turns into like T-shirts and coffee cups and those sorts of things. I'm going to share with you right now a 5-minute video called One Great Road. And this was a project just because everybody talks about we need numbers. We're going back to Washington, D.C. We need to show that this thing is good for the economy. But we hear so many stories, and I'm like, maybe the stories are more powerful than the actual numbers, the data. So we produced a video with State Parks and Travel Oregon that I'm going to share with you. It's really cool. They do a good job. But just to show you that in 2011, trail use is growing, and I think it's going to go off the charts next summer when this next section of trail opens up. But we really are investing in this. It would be great to demonstrate we're using it. I was in Oregon Field Guide. We just do different stories and try to get the word out. So I'm going to just turn it and show you the video, and then I'll open it up for questions. Yeah, that'll be good. I actually have posters back there, too, for Annie. No, that's not the right one.
Doing 60, 65, 70 maybe on Highway 84 does not do the gorge justice. And so I've learned through the years that the slower you experience the gorge, the more you will appreciate it. The gorge literally goes 2,000 to 3,000 feet above our heads. And in my opinion, the reason to come out here by bike is that we can go this slow and we can really see the gorge as it was intended to be seen back in the early 1915s when all they had was Model Ts that probably didn't do any faster than we're going right now.
The historic Columbia River Highway has done one important thing for me personally, and that is when I see a scenic route, I take it now, because for years I drove past this one and I didn't realize what I was missing until I started to work here. The historic Columbia River Highway offers a multitude of opportunities, from camping to hiking to viewpoints, magnificent viewpoints. It's a history. It allows you to travel east of Portland as though they did in the early 1900s.
Oregon's historic Columbia River Highway is a paragon of early 20th century road building excellence. Inspired by Switzerland's Oxenstrasse, the highway's visionaries, entrepreneur Sam Hill and engineer Samuel Lancaster, created a road that would convey passengers and commerce while providing a spectacular scenic experience amongst the natural wonders of the gorge.
A lot of people like to drive the scenic highway, but they really don't get much opportunity to leave their car. So the fact that there's a farm here and that the farm is available to the public through a fruit stand or a wine tasting room, then the people have an opportunity, to get out of their car and actually see more up close the gorge and all its beauty.
I would like everybody to turn around, look out, and tell me 2 changes you see today that we haven't seen the other times. The water's higher, yes. More clouds. Yeah, no wind. That's a temporary thing, I'm sure. We are at the Twin Tunnels on the old Columbia Gorge River Highway, and we are Mosher Middle School. We are 60 7th and 8th graders in a blended classroom, and it's a charter school within 1 mile. This
opportunities that are so integrated in our curriculum. We can be outside and we can be studying geology. We can be studying volcanic formations that are being formed before our very eyes.
I think it's really quite fun because not only do we learn about this stuff in the textbooks that we read, but we also get to see it afterwards. It's more of a hands-on experience and it helps you remember.
It's what every child needs, the connection from the curriculum to what's really out here in their backyard.
The tourists we get here really are from all over. It's one of the neat things about the National Scenic Area is that it draws both for its natural beauty and the sports. So we really get a wide variety of state and regional tourists that are just getting away for a short trip to the gorge. And then we get several international travelers that include this on part of their tour of a larger part of the United States.
62 of the original 73 miles of the highway are now open to travel, either by motor vehicle or foot and bicycle. There's a clear path to reconnecting the remaining 11 miles.
Currently, bikers right now compete with I-84 traffic, including some of these big semis. With this new trail, they'll be able to have a safer passage.
Columbia River Gorge is the only national scenic area that exists in the country. It would mostly just be great to see that connection happen all the way through. I think the popularity of it would rise. It would become a nationally renowned trail to go that far through a scenic area. And our business would be directly connected to that rise, for sure.
The historic Columbia River Highway and State Trail are one-of-a-kind assets for Oregon. With continued support, we'll complete the last 11 miles and give Oregonians and visitors from around the world a national treasure to enjoy.
There you go. So that's my great job at ODOT. Pretty lucky to work on this, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them and kind of fill you in on what else is going on.
I think I want your job.
What percentage of it is open to vehicles, and what percentage is open to just hiking and biking?
It's probably, when complete, there'll be 20 miles of hiking and biking trails, and the whole corridor is 73 miles long. So it's a percentage of that, like 30%, 40%.
So you mentioned the oral history report and the goal of making connections and building trust. I'm curious if there was any consultation with the Columbia River Indian tribes, because I see this as an opportunity to increase visibility of the people that have lived here since time immemorial, not just back to the 1800s. And so I'm just curious if you could speak to that.
Well, I went to all the, I've given presentations to all the cultural resource groups at each of the tribes in the gorge. And actually next week, I'm taking out the Grand Ronde tribe, who's interested on the trail section that's under construction now, incorporating some artwork or some kind of opportunities along it. But I hope to really reach out more to the tribes. They all think it's a great project when I presented the different plans to them and want to stay involved. And yeah, I'm most curious about Mitchell Point, because in some of the old obituary of when doing my oral history project, it said that they used to call Mitchell Point Storm King, the Native Americans, because that's where the storms change. And it's actually interesting when you go down to the gorge at that point there is when it kind of feels like you're going from western Oregon to eastern Oregon, and that's kind of where the storms kick up. But they kept Mitchell Point after a name of an early pioneer, so I'm like, none of the Native Americans that I've talked to have mentioned that, but I'm like, oh, that might be a good opportunity to bring in their heritage.
I was wondering if you mentioned some of the engineering difficulties. If you had occasion to look at the original Samuel Lancaster designs, and if you got any insights from those.
Yeah, we learned a lot from, it's funny that when you look at the original plans, because Samuel Lancaster, when they laid out the road, Mitchell Point in particular, because we always look at Mitchell Point. It's this crazy point that sticks out, and you can drive by it today, and you can see where the old tunnel was. I think it was like one of the first slides I had. It was a 5-window tunnel that was modeled after the Oxenstrasse in Switzerland. It was a beautiful tunnel. And in the 60s, ODOT, in its infinite wisdom, blew it off the face of the cliff to make way for room for I-84 below. And so we've been out there many times. Can we go up, over, around Mitchell Point? And we found interesting engineering studies from 1914 when they were doing the same exact work we're doing. Well, if we made it a 20% trail up and over, we could get over the thing. And the engineers were like, no, it has to be 5 to 8% slope. And we did the same thing. So at Mitchell Point, we've reverted back to their original plans and say the only way around Mitchell Point, I think they got it right, was a tunnel. So our new trail plan calls for a new tunnel. It has to be 3 times as long as the original tunnel, because when we blew the tunnel off the cliff face, we fractured the rock. Now we have to go back into the rock about 50 feet to get the unfractured rock, so the tunnel gets longer, but we can do it. But we use a lot of that, and if you look at the design guidelines we use for the trail development, it's the same guidelines that Samuel Lancaster used, his same curving radius, his same slopes, and we try to learn from a lot of that.
So you mentioned a lot of different projects that you got grants for, like signs and interpretive panels and such. I'm wondering how you, what the process is of prioritizing, like which, kind of projects you're going to do, and if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. It's sort of, there's so many, we have an advisory committee that is, in 1986, it was established by the Oregon Legislature, and it includes 10 members. 6 are private citizens, 2 from each county in the gorge, so 2 from Multnomah, 2 from Hood River, 2 from Wasco County, and then 4 agency representatives. So Jason Tell, my boss at ODOT, is on the committee. The area manager for state parks, Travel Oregon sits on it, as well as the state historic preservation officer. And that committee meets 4 times a year, and they help with the prioritization of the projects. Like, for example, that viewshed management project wasn't a priority until the advisory committee said, we need to make this a priority. Like, the trees are getting out of control. Let's see what we can do. And so that was their priority last year, is to take on that viewshed management plan. They have an implementation plan for the trail, like which pieces should be built first, makes sense. So they help us with that.
Sort of building on that same question, thinking about that Mosier Hub and some of the other projects that you guys have undertaken, have you found that local communities have been willing to match funds with you guys, or have some of those other folks on the board, like Travel Oregon, also been giving money to ODOT to help do these projects?
That's a good point. So right now we're working on the Mosier Hub, and we were able to get money through a scenic byway grant for phase 1, which is essentially $35,000. And if you've ever worked at ODOT or in transportation, you know you can basically build like 4 feet of sidewalk for that. It's not going to go very far. But we're like, we have phase 1, we want to give them something. And so we're working with that community now to come up with a list of things. Like, even if it's like we do a nice little wall and a sign, could somebody in the community donate a picnic table? Or we look at those You Fix It bike stations. We know, like, we did the research, they're about $1,000. Maybe we could, so the city is now taking up that cause to go locally and try to go to get donations, or from different bike shops or from different corporations in the area, to kind of fill in those gaps where we don't have the grant to fill in. But I think that will be a good opportunity. If we do that full Mosier plan, I think those hubs will be a good opportunity for the private dollars to come in and help support the highway.
How much is the entire thing expected to cost?
$44 million, and that's not including the money we've already spent. But it's a big hurdle to get over, and we're trying to take it piece by piece. But that's why it's important for you guys, as you get out in the working world, to remember this project, and as you get to be in, to make decisions or help funding or write letters of support, it's going to take somebody like grants. It's going to take this project standing up as a priority, like, and seeing that this is really a project of statewide significance, and that when we're done, we really will have a national treasure, and that it's more for like the tourism, but it's also, think how cool it would be for us. so close to Portland to get out to the gorge that quickly.
So you showed on a map that the original highway extended actually, it looked all the way to downtown Portland. Is there any interest in bringing the historic Columbia River Highway closer than the current extents in the future?
That's a good point. It went down Stark Street and Halsey Street, like out through East Portland, so you can probably follow it. And I think there's even monument markers, I've heard rumors, out on some of those areas and different places left. We always are trying to work with like East Multnomah County and Trouttail to look at connections or maps or connections to Max. We just haven't gotten there yet. Like, it would be really cool as tourism goes, like, how do you get from the Max stop to the trail? Or how that goes to our bike map. We need a bike map really bad. And it's like one of my, that's my priority, is that our next step is to kind of figure out, because we have a bike map today. I should have brought it, because it's really kind of sad. It shows I-84 as a green line, and it shows the historic highway as the red line. Because the I-84 has the wide shoulder and it's straight and doesn't have the elevation gain. But so everybody's like, why are these cyclists on I-84? I'm like, oh, they probably found our bike map and went there, you know? So it's really sad. So that's my goal.
So sort of speaking to that, I mean, are there any plans to try to make the historic highway seem safer for cyclists? Because I know it's windy and narrow, and if you've got like a 12-year-old kid riding next to you,
yeah,
it'd be a little scary when someone's driving by.
On the trail sections or on the road sections?
On the road sections.
Yeah, I feel like that's our next hurdle. I feel like we're asking, like we were planning for this, like come to the gorge, ride your bike, but it's a narrow, windy road with tons of tourist traffic too. And so if you've read like the Portland bike, like places in Corbett dislike cyclists. I think there's even stories of them sticking tacks on the roadway and those sorts of stories. So we really need to figure out how to go to that next step and get ahead of it, because I feel like even next summer it's going to happen where we'll have to look at some kind of, so I'm pushing for a good, if you're ever looking for like graduate student projects or whatever, like a traffic user conflict study, or we need something to help, because it is again, it's a national landmark, so you have those issues to contend. So you can't make it wider, you can't make the shoulder wider. So it is a national scenic area, so you don't want to put up too many signs and do signs work. But I was thinking maybe we delve into share arrows on some of the narrow viaducts, or maybe there's rules of the road, maybe it's through education, or maybe you could go as far as one way on weekends, or crazier ideas that I love that people at ODOT don't like. I'm like, let's do a Sunday parkways. Let's close it to traffic and just open it like on Sunday mornings, like once a year, or test it out. Maybe there's some opportunity for those sorts of things. It's funny that people, it's like you don't really realize it, but there's this, well, you probably do realize it, but there's this crazy anti-bicyclist. Like this one woman, it's like, they poop in my yard. Like, then she writes them all off that way. And it's like, come on, no. They've got to open up their lines of communication and try to work with them. But there is probably, and then they're really annoyed because when the cyclists go out there, they ride 5 abreast and don't let people pass. So we have to train the cyclists, it's single file for the next 9 miles or something like that. We could, I don't know, those are my cute little things I come up with.
So you kind of touched on a little bit, you kind of answered some of my questions. You had encouraged us to remember this project as we become professionals, and I just wanted to see if you could discuss what are some of the challenges. You kind of just said what some of them are now, but
yeah, and I think we'll have
so we
to,
can
like,
help
learn
you
to
in the
share
future.
the resource too, because it is narrow, and you invite people to come out, but like maybe we market it too much and then it gets crowded, or and people say, like, I don't want to ride with my 11-year-old son out on the highway, it's too unsafe. But then I could say, well, we are building these multi-use trail segments, so bring them there. So if you're not the cyclist who likes to ride in traffic, or wake up at Sunday morning at 7 a.m. rather than at 12 noon, when all the tourist traffic are out. So maybe there's better identifying times to ride, or when to go, or how to get there, because in the wintertime there's nobody on that trail. You could, like, on the highway, you can like walk down the middle of the road and cars barely pass you. It's amazing. I think when you look at the average daily trips, it's been the same between now and like 1940. Like, it hasn't gone up too much. It's surprising. But if you go out there on a Saturday, oh my God, this is where we need some kind of I think that's the next thing, the next big hurdle, the next big priority is like Multnomah Falls on a Saturday in August is like unbelievable crowded. And everybody is almost like putting their heads in the sand, like, what do we do about it? Like, we don't want to deal with it. But I think we'll have to deal with it and try to figure out what to do. So PSU, help us.
I have a question on the trail use. Are you doing, how do you come up with those count numbers? Do you have any permanent counters, or is that just
Yeah,
some
Parks
temporary?
has permanent counters. And actually, there's a Friends group. So if you're ever interested in this project, it's Friends of the Historic Highway. They just purchased a trail counter that went out. There's a section of the trail from west of Cascade Locks that goes under I-84, so it's in a tunnel. And they put a counter there so we can compare this year's numbers till next year when the trail opens, so we'll have some comparison to show how use is growing. Unfortunately, Parks numbers, that number on that chart I showed you, is done by cars parking in their day-use parking lots. So they have they say assume like 3 people per car, but as you know, a lot of the cyclists on the trail don't park in those parking lots. They come from the communities, or they park elsewhere, or they're through cyclists coming through. So those numbers don't really capture the use that well. So we're looking at doing, that's another on my wish list too, is one of those high-tech counters that tell you how many cyclists, bikers, the infrared counters would be especially nice on the Hood River to Mosier section.
Yeah, we have one of those.
You do? Cool. Oh, it's on my Christmas list. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, before we thank Kristen, next week's speaker will be Star McMillan from Oregon State University on a topic of economic importance, I'm sure. So, a VMT tax. So, no, just VMT? Yeah. VMT. All right. Sorry. Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you.